Once again in the arena were Priyan and her opponent. Riley was woken up by someone urging him to get up, as the tournament was about to begin. It was Lady Aras. Riley slept in his chair in the auditorium. "Your son had to see that because it's not every day you get the chance to witness something like that," said his mother, gently waking him up and explaining. As he composed himself, the third prince rubbed his eyes. "Does the Arencium family live there?" he asked. Appian didn't look good today. He was visibly shaking, clearly afraid. They informed the prince that, in fact, he was the youngest son of the Arencium dynasty, and that, it seemed, he would be the last to act. Yen claimed to have heard that yesterday he had also fought. "Of course," Sarah said with great enthusiasm, winning a high-level fight against his opponent. "It was him," she continued, the competitor brandishing the two short swords. She declared that it still pained her that yesterday's duel had ended so abruptly. "Two swords?" Ian asked. "Is this user-friendly?" "Of course," said Zara. Riley wanted to know if Zara had seen anything strange yesterday. The girl intervened during Serenzium's young son's argument and pleaded ignorance. The maid didn't understand anything the prince said when Riley asked about the smell. "The game would start in 3 seconds," someone shouted. The girl mentioned the smell. "I don't have a face with a pawn today. It's shaking, and that's typical." 3, 2, a loud one. The duel had begun. When a prince screamed, everyone froze. The prince's sword glittered in the air. Face down on the floor was a Priyan. Shield flags displaying a fearless lion and 2 crossed swords hung on the walls. Frantic, a plog banged on the table. He screamed and questioned why things were happening the way they did. "They should have given the award yesterday," he commented. "What just happened?" Plok wondered. "He should relax," said the red-haired girl. The first prince of the Arencian family shouted that his younger brother had fractured his leg and he couldn't calm down. "I had lost." Appian was face down, legs on the ground, and trembling on the ground was the prince. They had gone that morning to the lower section of Solia, the girl reported as she looked at them. A Plok seemed to squint in anger. They informed them that they could no longer provide things. The red-haired maiden was informing them. The first prince intervened. Anger grew in a Plog. Low Solia's bitches had betrayed them, he mused. "It seemed," said the girl, "to be the case. Although he claimed to have tried to blackmail them, they had escaped the trap." A Plog shouted that he didn't know how they dared and called them bastards. He looked shyly at his hand and his entire body. The prince recalls Riley hovering over him and promising to tell him once and to pay close attention. A Plog remembered the wicked smile and the advice to stop playing dirty tricks and have fun. By now, the first prince was enraged. How dare they, he pondered. Who did they mistake him for, considering he was a gentleman from an aristocratic family? Grabbing his head, he said. Under his skin, he thought, there were bugs crawling. A liquid burst from his lips. That medicine, he recalled, seemed to have finally made a Plog lose his mind. He decided to take it himself, if they didn't give it willingly. Prit swung his blade with an insane smile on his face. Ignoring Solia, he believed he could easily defeat them if they stood in his way. Since a Plog in Corvado was from the Arencium family and the girl questioned him, amazed as to where he was going, he consented when the prince stated that Appian needed him. The master didn't consider responding when the maid continued playing. His only ability was to move closer to his goal. The clouds glowed orange during a stunning sunset. Someone was happy that the competition was finally over. It was Sarah, who, knowing that they would return home tomorrow, happily declared that today was an excellent day to visit the local tourist attractions. Reacting, Lady Aras expressed her deep sadness at the impending return the following day. Raleigh usually strolled around carefree, with her hands behind her head. Someone asked if she had gotten it yet. 20 minutes before the end of the competition, he remembered the prince's words about going to the temple. The girl asked why, and Riley told her that she should catch fire and tell her everything that had happened with the bomb. Back, he asked if she had hurt the man who had disturbed her life. They said that the elderly man, who was an imposter, had rebelled against the prince. Nani paused and then began to speak. Even her mother, she reported, had turned against her. Is Raleigh sure the temple goers would hear her? The girl asked. Everything will be fine, said the third prince. In fact, his comments surprised Nani a little. That had been a long time ago. Raleigh released the people into the basement of the cage, and they commented that she was not alone now. It was one of them, said another. A third thought their appearances were similar. Witches had disfigured them all. Although his scars were distinct, his black hair was the same. They, some commented, looked alike. This also made her his friend. Sunset is almost here. Bait would be an excellent idea, someone suggested. Now, what kind of bait? Asked another. It was the type, said the first, that no one could miss. The second looked in his pocket. Nini was holding Medicare Zoa, a medicine produced in the magic tower. She was sure she could handle it, she added. Assuring them that everyone had been through this, she held their hands. This cannot happen again. Distressed, another girl declared that she didn't want to go through that again. Crying and hugging herself, another girl declared that she hated everything. They were right, Nini said, smiling at them. The young woman had tears in her eyes. They should start their lives again, he commented, pausing for a moment before continuing. Were the boy and the two women ready? Nini asked. He ordered them to follow her without waiting for an answer. They only needed to enter the temple after they had already left it. Opening the door, Nini was about to enter. However, one of the monks stopped them and gently asked who they were. They grouped together in a circle as if they were ready to defend themselves at any moment. What were they doing to be in this horrible condition? The priest asked. The masked man had told them to visit the temple, not the castle, he remembered. They had to go to the temple, not the castle, he recalled the masked man saying. Still, the priest did not meet his expectations. With great fanfare, he signaled them to leave. Reasons? About your clothes. They came from the lower regions of Solia. He then asked them to leave. Nini boldly asked to wait. But a pair of jagged swords were pointed at the priest as he approached. Tell her to wait, he said. The only person from the lower parts of Solia, Nini informed me, was hurt. The young man wasn't having fun, and the dark-haired girl in the back was sick. Other people on the left and some on the right were equally alone, Nini commented, unlike her. These people were barely making ends meet, she said. The priest examined them closely. Taking the medicine from the Grandmaster's pocket, the girl informed him that she had something extremely important to share with the temple members. She informed the priest who had come to say that cruel experiments on human beings were being conducted in the wizard's tower and handed him some medicine. He declared his desire to know what they were doing there. He was surprised to see what Nini had packed. To be honest, he was amazed. Before he could ask anything, Nini urged everyone to pay attention. Nini asked someone dressed in white what his name was. Everyone heard the female voice again and saw the saint there. Right behind Nini, Santa Frisia approached her. Nini asked, "Is it really the saint?" when Frisia practically shot. Nini stated, "It was her," Freya replied, smiling. What she meant escaped Nini. With a quick turn, the saint contacted Steele, who answered immediately. How many people were there in the temple at that time? He asked. Walking down the town's gravel street, a man swore. People looked at him on the way, unhappy, and he continued to swear. Plucky looked horrible. He was shaking and holding on, his eyes covered in horrible bruises. Being from an aristocratic family from Irentian, he questioned how they dared to leave them. Walking forward, the prince declared that he would kill them all. He was shocked to find people like that there. Someone behind him muttered, laughing. A plog turned to this. Grandmaster Astroy personally approached him. The prince was the target of his pointed finger. That was the one that had scratched him. The damn foreigner. Here is Astroy's applaud. Yes, he shouted, quite suddenly. That their meeting had happened at the perfect time. Claiming to have been the one to deliver the goods to the men in Lower Solia, he shouted. That herb had been warned not to be sold, Applaud shouted furiously. Astroy punched him in the face and said it was because of that silly weed. The old man ordered Applaud to stop talking, even though he hadn't finished his sentence. He glared at the prince, and the wizard asked Applaud if he thought he wouldn't find out. Holding the cut on his face, the first prince could not hear his grandfather. Taking out an herb from his pocket, Astroy handed it to Applaud. Applaud was standing still as if he was under hypnosis. He let the scent of the plant envelop him. Calmly, the old man informed him that he had betrayed him in this way, even after giving him everything. Applaud muttered instead of responding for a moment. He then shouted. His pupils seemed to have disappeared behind his eyelids. Foam rose from his mouth. Twisted and trembling was the prince. If Applaud wanted that, Astriu wouldn't stop screaming. If that was so, he thought, why was he walking around wearing a mask like a slimy rat? Not that the prince would respond. Or respond in any way. After shaking his head, the old man said, I have nothing more to say, said Astroy. How to proceed then? With a gold coin in his palm, the old man said that Plock should check what he had lost. Finally, the prince regained his calm, smiled, and his pupils returned to normal. Looking curiously at the teacher, he spoke. As Aplog didn't know why the teacher had his plate, he began to look at himself. That was enough, Astra told the young man to end the comedy. Too late, he said. His hand with the narcotic plant caught fire with flaming mana. Not that Aplog had time to react appropriately. Aplog was horrified, even screaming. The prince made no attempt to pick up the leaves. Falling to the ground, he begged the great master not to do that. Aplog sobbed. Amazed and even in a state of terror, the prince looked at the burnt vegetation. Astru looked around the entire situation, convinced that something was truly unusual and undoubtedly incorrect. The fact that the prince was so weak amazed me. They called him from behind as soon as he realized he could actually, before Astro, finish his own thought. Saint Frisia was there with some temple priests and some men. Frisia stated that they had recently discovered that he was a suspect in a crime. He asked some questions, bitterly. Smiling carefully, the teacher began to ask the saint what he was doing there. Couldn't finish. Why did Frisia interrupt him and start discussing cruel human experiments? He spoke about the production of drugs and their illicit distribution. The magistrate seemed obviously perplexed as he listened to her. Now he sternly questioned whether he was involved. Once again showing a happy smile, Asteroid laughed and promised to talk to them later. There would be a teleportation. He couldn't, however, as a spell cancellation sounded. Furthermore, this turn of events took the master by surprise. Purple mana enveloped his hand, hindering his magic. He didn't understand what spell cancellation meant. It still amazes me that a 7th level wizard would have such a physique. Still, it wasn't Frisia, it was Nani. The magistrate could now see his face because the hood had fallen from his head. I asked where the bastard was going. The magistrate was surprised to see her among the temple goers. Nani, according to Frisia, had given them this information. Amazed, the girls sat next to each other, and Frisia asked Astroy if it was true that he made drugs and experimented on people. It looked like there was going to be a big argument there. Ian also mentioned to the young master that this place seemed to have promising business. Really smiled happily. He thought that Nani had brought a saint and negotiated with the temple administration. The prince concluded that all that was left was to watch what was happening because Nani seemed to be quite focused. With a gentle smile and platitudes about how he had no idea what they were talking about or what drugs might be in his magic tower, the magistrate tried to defend himself. They didn't even grow therapeutic herbs, he claimed. In that case, Frisia said, he had to answer to her. Declaring loudly that he had not done so, he asked to swear on the goddess Irene. The girl had yellow light in her eyes. Now the magistrate trembled and closed his eyes. With her eyes wide open, the girl gave him a careful look. He seemed quite uninterested in her, and I assumed he would never talk to her no matter how he looked at her. These people, however, are in a higher position. Tensed, Astroy said nothing. Would he respond? Asked Frisia. He questioned whether it was true that Mr. Astroy himself had conducted the tests and produced the medicines mentioned by Nani. Still, the teacher said nothing. He leaned over now and laughed. Indeed, he said. That master seemed insane. He said he sold drugs manufactured in the basement of the magic tower to aristocrats. He claimed the funds paid for his experiments. Quite simple tests. He looked at Frisia. She looked obviously disappointed. Astra asked about the nature and existence of the problem, and Nani gritted her teeth. She screamed that that bastard lied about everything, clearly furious. He was implying that the experiments were modest, she said, clenching her fist. The girl was furious. Screaming, she called him an idiot. She shot him in the head. Next bastard. The girl was suddenly stunned. Someone advanced. Still, Ian was at the bottom, out of control and seeming to burn throughout his body. The master of all was insulted and questioned what he had done. Ian yelled at the bastard. The Great War was started, he shouted, by damn drugs. How many tears and blood have his people shed for this war, he asked. Surprised by the old servant were the girls and the supervisor. Saying that those majors didn't like him in the past, he was preparing to punch someone. His comments made Rolly a little embarrassed. He perked up again as he declared that he hated idiots like him in private. Coughing, Frisia stated that he was involved in the production and sale of drugs, as well as human abuse when he was in Solia, and so she insisted that he accompany them straight to the ministry there. Two gentlemen stepped in front of her to defend her. The gentleman had a combative demeanor and dark eyes in the shadows. He asked, coldly, if they wanted to arrest him at that moment. The master also inquired whether they had forgotten that he was a 7th circle wizard. Once again, he used his mana. After all, he suggested, Perhaps we shouldn't make an enemy of him." Silence fell from the saint. Then he said, "You really shouldn't." Was it true? Asteroid wondered. It was his mistake, said the master, to have the thief at his side, and he proposed to let him deal with Nani alone. Even more distressed, Nani questioned what he had just said. Frisia looked at the master and replied that he had recently received a revelation from God. Fearing what the great master would say, he asked. He began to talk about the one who would save everyone. He had already arrived on this planet. Raleigh, tense, knew these words well. After the priests, Frisia and the knights created a shield. The girl gave the order for the knights to attack the master. Arenas of grease and yellow-orange mana sprouted from his palm as Astra attacked first and ordered them to see the attack as their own defense. The knights dodged as best they could, without waiting to try the sand. Some were already groaning in pain. The master then uttered the word swamp, and the knights' feet began to sink into the now viscous rocky path. One of the knights urged the others to leave as quickly as possible, preparing another attack, Astro, and stated that Santa Frisia could still take back her words. He said many people would die if they came into contact with him. Although for now Saint Frisia remained mute and said nothing, she was furious with her lord. The injured soldiers were covered with golden mana as Saint Frisia said the word to heal. He advised the honorable men to remove any local who attempted to cross the road. But he told them that many more innocent people would die if he didn't stop Astroya right then. In the end, the men gave the order and instructed them to deal with it. Astroy created a whirlpool engulfed in flames. Precious was pushed to come here and take the risk for him. Now, Riley understood that it was the beginning of the fight. Upon the magistrate's raised palm, the whirlwind intensified, said the phrase meteorite. He warned them to go to hell and accuse the scattered saint. Straight towards the saint and the surviving knights flew the whirlwind. A little fearful, Frisia raised her palm towards the meteorite that was heading towards her and shouted for safety. Santa Frisia's mana and the Magister's mana met. The knights prepared their shields. The saint's tunic, once white as snow, had some scratches and ash on the arms. Nani gave the saint a somewhat nervous look. When the Grandmaster said that he didn't seem reckless, a sphere that shot a multitude of magical arrows materialized behind him. They would have to fight to the death in that situation, he stated. The old man decided to try his luck. They were going to stop the saint, the men shouted. They said they would have to wait a while, as they had requested reinforcements for the Solia fortress. A torrent of arrows shot towards them before they could finish. In front of them, Frisia erected a magical barrier. It won't last long, someone shouted. And this was true, as each arrow that hit the shield created a new crack. Please reverse the magic, Frisia begged Nani. The arrows had already broken the shield. No, Nani replied. The girl raised both her hands and shouted the command to cancel the spell while gathering her purple mana. The shield and arrows began to disperse before them. Frisia screamed in pain as one of the magic arrows cut into her cheek. Ian drew his sword and looked around. The terrified villagers rushed around him, with Raleigh following behind. Ian jumped in front of her. She looked aggressive, with her long hair falling over her shoulders. The way the old servant looked at her left her amazed. Had he seen her during the battle, he asked. Meanwhile, Ian crushed the arrows one by one, ignoring the girl's questions. Fighting energy shone in his green eyes. Having cut all the arrows amazed the magistrate. The servant's interference and eventual loss of patience angered Riley. Fearing for her life, Zara urged him to scream for help. Lady Iris was also scared. With trembling hands, the third prince advised him to say goodbye to his mother first and wait another 5 minutes. He was really talking nonsense, Lady Iris said. Standing next to him, Astroy laughed and declared that everything amused him, that he seemed to have met the worst, and that there were many excellent spectators in the city. The warm-up was over, the teacher announced, and now they would play responsibly. Evil Zen retorted that he could not escape from a simple prison. He would not be innocent, the professor laughed, if he killed all the witnesses to the crime. Now purple, Samana summoned the underworld. The word hung over Nani. The girl understood that it was a spell and could not be broken, but she also understood that Astroy would have to die from very lethal dark magic if she wanted to start over. Astra was particularly threatening. They would understand, Nani thought, what was done. Not understanding why his legs didn't obey him. Suddenly, a flame sounded in the girl's head. She was startled. The voice said that they wanted to start a new life, both her and the hero who was ready to save this world. The person would have to undergo testing, he added. Wakefield put on the mask. where the voice originated from was not particularly clear to Nani. What other underworlds existed, Ian wondered. And someone shouted, asking the saint what to do next. Frisia was also very scared. He didn't know that Master Asteroid possessed such enormous magical power. Why was she doing all this? Asked Frisia. Asteroid urged the girl to remember the goddess Idnissa, but did not answer her question. Asteroid's opponents. Nani shouted at them to get out of the way, promising to try to stop him. She directed her enchanted energy towards the Lord of the Underworld. What was she doing? Asked Frisia. Although Nani found it very challenging, she became convinced that she could do it. Tears fell from her eyes as she considered the possibility that she had only lived for this day. The girl remembered how, kneeling on the threshold of her own home, she had informed her mother that it was her daughter, even though the moment she had been waiting for so long had disappointed her and stolen her hope. That man, he remembered, specifically the moment when Rolly reached out to her. The girl's eye, damaged in the experiment, was bleeding. But despite the pain, she was happy that that man had shown her that there was still hope. So if she died now, she would not regret it. She was talking nonsense, said the man in the black hood as they began to argue. He said that all the work he had done to rescue her would be for nothing if she died. The man in the mask who had helped Nani earlier was still there. The prince had broken the enchantment of the underworld with a single blow of his sword, shocking Nani. Astra was horrified. Ian and the others, including Frisia, were equally surprised. The elderly man pointed to the masked man and said that it was him, that the wizard had stated what he had, that it was the fool he had seen in the cellar. Riley scratched his head and ignored the teacher, wondering why Zera was moving so slowly when he could have saved you faster. Then, to anger his master even more, he repeated this while giving him a threatening look. The prince disrespectfully turned to face the holy woman Frisia, who was sitting on the stone road, and informed her that she possessed some sort of divine power, as her blade glowed with blue mana. Then he asked if she was capable of stopping him. She didn't seem to have much strength, muttered the third prince, softening his sword. Telling the girl that the underworld or whatever it was had disappeared, he lifted her by the neck. He then had to take his henchmen and get rid of them. Frisia remained unresponsive. She just looked at the interrogator. She was speechless and staring in great amazement as they let her in. Sandy was sitting behind the rock with two other men already, and she didn't say anything. When she finally said, "Healing," a wonderful golden energy emanated from her body and enveloped everyone around her. From a distance, Nani asked the man why he was there. He had promised not to intrude, she claimed. Not really. In retirement, Rolly commented, I remembered what he had said. He stated that he had not planned to do so, however. Why had he broken the enchantment of the underworld so easily? Asked the surprised wizard. Looking coldly at him, Riley commented that he had been making jokes for a long time. Nani was surprised. Astro was already shouting that he was a seventh circle mage, clearly very upset. What had the brat said? He wondered. He mentioned that he was fixing things here very slowly, Riley recalled. Then the prince said, more emphatically, that his mother had almost been hurt. He would therefore immediately fix everything now. The teacher was very angry. Although she had only broken the asteroid spell once, Nani thought, she knew he was no ordinary person. She wondered who it was. Someone held Nani by the shoulder. It was Riley. They had to finish what they started, he said happily. After all, she was right. The rest, he replied, she could consider later. Turning now to Han, he motioned for him to come closer, and Han obeyed decently. Riley instructed the young girl to take a deep breath after taking her hand. What was he doing? She asked. Calm. All he said was that it was time to put an end to this nonsense. The old man should shoot as many arrows as possible, the prince instructed. Ian understood now. Nani pointed directly at the Grandmaster. Todd asked if they had really made their decision. The man would be found and destroyed anyway, so there was no problem, he replied. To which the disguised prince said he would do whatever he wanted. If he could, he would kill him. He ordered him to go ahead. Around the three of them, a summoning circle materialized. Riley promised Ian that she would take care of the spell and allow him to keep it. The old man should trust him, he commented. Ian didn't ask the man any more questions and left. The wizard was hit by a deadly green mist from one of Ian's arrows, which also cut his cheek. Above Ian and Nani, the young man, a green magical sphere formed. Then Frisia appeared and said that she would also add her grain of sand. Riley and Ian looked at the saint in surprise. The prince asked him after a short while why he was doing this when he could just relax and go away. Frisia was furious. In fact, he stated, he only thanked them in those cases. The master's hand trembled a little. They were all losers in his opinion. He said that such insignificant fools did not deserve his attention. Ashura felt her hand tighten and knew she was down to about half her mana. However, he assumed it would be enough. Furious, the old man ordered them to die for him. The great master signaled a miracle. Now his aura was a pale blue like snow. Riley mentioned the old man's meanness. All he did was look at them. "Is Nani breathing?" he asked. "Yes," Nani said. The prince asked him to hit the old man. A powerful blow. "Of course," the girl replied. She was ready. Riley commented that he hadn't had a big fight in a long time, so this was fantastic. They would attack at the same time, he said, and the girl should gesture to her heart. Turning to Ian, the masked man said that his job would be to destroy the pendants from a distance. Nani should only concentrate on the strike. His hands were about to attack. She also felt the need to say something. However, the prince stopped her and reassured her. He said Ian would take care of everything else. Riley joked, "If it doesn't work out, we'll always have the holy power." Furious, Frisia said, "How much longer?" The Grand Master was furious beyond belief. Huge chunks of ice hurled themselves at them. Ian softened his formidable bow, which he had prepared to protect himself from the pendant's blows. The huge blocks turned into small, harmless pendants. Ian, meanwhile, was shooting arrows at the ice. He could feel small shards of ice pressing into his head. Behind them, the saint had erected a magical barrier. There was still a little left, the nanny was asked to explain. Suddenly, Nani became quite worried and pointed out to us that there was Manhwa ice covering the floor in the middle. Riley swore they were acting up there again and swore. 2 pieces of different ice supported his feet. He pressed Santa Frisia against him with one hand. She looked small. Afraid, the girl asked if she was still alive. Riley nodded, then the man's mask fell abruptly and he asked how she was. Surprised to discover it was Riley, Frisia. She claimed it was her last vision. Riley asked Nani if she was ready, then ignored her. "Ready," the girl declared. "Yes," Riley said. He had to drop the gun as soon as he gave the signal. Although Nani did not understand fire, the prince explained what it meant to attack the wizard with magic. The girl understood that it was because of their joint efforts that they had survived to that point. Master Astroy looked terrible. His eyes seemed to glow red, but he wouldn't feel an ounce of regret if he died from the blow. When Riley finally gave the command to attack, Nani threw a super punch. Purple mana exploded from the girl's spine. Blood gushed from her lips, and she thought her body was about to explode. It was all a farce, the magistrate commented while laughing maliciously. His dark magic was fighting against Nani's bright mana. Nani believed it was not enough. He felt no regrets. Meanwhile, Riley threw his sword at the master, not knowing if releasing it now would be effective. The Grand Master was scared and terrified. The prince's sword pierced him. "What was that?" asked Astro. Nani's black magic has now merged with the master in the hole. Purple explosion. Silent and still, she slept. It fell from the city's rooftops. Nani's black hair spread out on the road. She was surrounded, her face mottled with small cuts. She accidentally leaned on Pedra Street. Not far away, the snow already covered half of his torso. Leaning against the wall was the jade body of old Grandmaster Astroy. Ian and Frisia rushed to Nani. Frisia bowed and hugged Nani, the saint shouting her name. I asked the saint if she was okay. The girl cried and screamed at Nani that she couldn't die like this. Her tears fell a little on the cold face of the incapacitated Nani. Frisia begged her not to die. The entire snow-covered scene looked terribly gloomy. Frisia sat next to Nani's bed, who was asleep. The saint looked sad. He remembered asking Ainsi if he knew where the masked man had fled to, but he replied that he had seen the wizard fall from the tower and that he had not seen the man since. Meanwhile, the old man lifted Nani into his arms. Frisia said he was far away and that's why she hadn't noticed he was gone. And then Zed arrived abruptly and disappeared again. Ian, holding the unconscious girl in his arms, explained that if it weren't for that person, they wouldn't have been able to stop Astroy. Frisia recognized this to be true, so she asked if Ian was serving the Ipiet family. If that was true, she thought she had last seen him in the temple, and the old servant said yes, it was true. Nani finally woke up and saw Frisia by her side. Frisia came to her senses. Nani was awake, wiped her eyes and asked where she was. The saint happily replied that she was in the temple and was extremely happy that Nani was safe. The last two sentences surprised the girl and she asked again. Frisia apologized to Nani. She said she did the best she could. Frisia told her that the magic he acquired during the tests in the tower had generated certain modifications in his body. It was a mutation. This reduced Nani's life expectancy and turned into a disease. Frisia said it had been a long time since those tests. Then Nani responded, understandingly, that was why they couldn't fix it. Frisia was quiet and then responded positively. Frisia bowed her head and said Nani gathered all her courage into a fist and told her about Astro. And she couldn't even help. Frisia asked for forgiveness. Nani smiled dryly and replied that everything was fine and she was prepared. Frisia was irritated, as she didn't even know how to thank or apologize. She explained that thanks to Nani, they managed to stop Astro. Nani insisted that it was nothing, that everything was fine, and that in reality, she hadn't helped much. The girl put her hand to her chest and begged the saint to speak. First, she uttered a thoughtful "I," and then asked how much longer she could survive. The saint's eyes were full of tears. She indicated that it was impossible to completely cure the condition, but that they could increase life expectancy somewhat. Tears ran down her hands, which were holding the white handkerchief. She indicated that in the worst-case scenario, she would have until the end of the summer, and if she made it, she could survive the winter. However, the most plausible prediction was that this would happen by the end of October. Nani repeated the word autumn, got up from the bed and thought that she seemed to be focusing too much on revenge. She and the saint sat facing each other in the dark chamber and Nani thanked Frisia profusely. Frisia commented that Nani didn't need to thank her. She replied that she hadn't done anything for her. She asked how she could look into her eyes after that. In this situation, Nani tried to negotiate that his conquest never officially took place. Frisia asked what she meant. Nani said she was talking about how she found the teacher's faults and killed him. She stated that it was not her who did all this, but someone else. The girl remembered the determined expression of the person with the mask. Nani smiled and commented that if anyone should gain fame and honor through an achievement, it was him. He commented that if they wanted to do something good for her, it would be preferable to satisfy that man's desire. Frisia stated that the man Nani was thinking about intervened and asked if Nani knew who he was. Nani says yes. There were lots of dazzling fireworks outside the beautiful structure. Two people were fighting with swords. Riley sized them up and instructed Zara to just watch them. She asked if she had seen them. Zara thought she should see it, and that's what she saw. Riley asked if there was anything she didn't like, but she looked at the stands and talked about legs. Relay was also pleased to finally understand. The third prince was irritated because he didn't use his legs, only shaking his arms. Lady Iris saw this and commented that it was good to see him so interested. She asked Ian if it was like that. Han made a horrible face and didn't respond. The lady recognized it and asked if everything was okay. He commented sadly that it seemed like his body was no longer as robust as it once was. Lady Iris asked what he was saying. She reassured her, noting that at that moment she could do nothing, and Ian informed the lady that it was fortunate that she was not injured. Zeta was excited that the tournament was finally over. Han asked the young lord when he would have time to return and commented that it was good that he hadn't been injured. Meanwhile, below, the soldiers were bowing. With a judge between them, Riley replied yes, that he was just watching the show and immediately returned. Zeta replied, irritated, that she didn't understand why he had gone there, that it was dangerous. He said it was a nightmare. A young man entered the room and introduced himself as Daniel. He said he had something to say before he was handed over. He stated that recently a man had exposed the terrible horrors that occurred in the tower, and that this individual was a member of an aristocratic family. His words surprised Riley, who tensed. Riley made a face and Lady Iris asked with interest who this was about. Daniel said out loud that he was a man from the Ipiet family. Now Riley was truly terrified. Daniel, in turn, continued calmly, addressing the young knight of Ipiet, saying that he knew. The young man asked where he was sitting and asked him to make a sign, and Antartamideo whispered something, a suspense of different syllables. Zara turned to the third prince and asked if he had heard what Prince Daniel had said. However, she spoke to an empty seat. Riley was no longer there. All that was left was a Coke and a burger. Zara didn't understand where he had gone and called for him again. But, of course, no one responded, and the Coke and the hamburger fell to the floor. Meanwhile, Riley sat in the dark bathroom stall and wondered how they knew. The prince remembered Daniel's declarations that the young lord of the line of Ipiet had discovered the terrible horrors that occurred in the enchanted tower. The temple of Solia and the danger averted. The words that he was the hero of the family and pellet were particularly strong in the prince's thoughts. These nightmarish words, as he understood them, haunted him even in this life. Riley didn't understand how this had happened. After all, he had disguised himself and even changed his voice so that no one would reliably recognize him. The prince remembered aiming directly at his master's heart and calculating the force for the sword to unite with Nani's magic. Riley pondered why this had happened. Under the hole at the bottom of the cabin door, a few feet with snow-white shoes appeared. A few people were present, one of whom announced that they had finally found him. Another questioned whether he was really there, and the second confirmed it. A female voice advised to open the door with magic, but someone interrupted Nani, asking her to wait. Nani ignored it, ordered the door to be opened, and her magic helped her achieve this. Riley sat in front of them, looking distressed. The prince looked questioningly at the girl and wondered if she had gone completely crazy. Santa Frisia, who accompanied Nani, was embarrassed to find Raid sitting in the bathroom and covered her eyes with her hands. As Nani silently stared at her hero, still holding his arm, Raid lowered his head and regretfully announced that he was going to sue them for sexual harassment. He looked at Nani and asked how they had managed to discover her. The girl closed her good eye and pointed to the other, stating that she used that one. Now, this ability didn't seem to fit the prince at all. She remembered exactly what she had told him. She assured her that she was right and that it was not magic, but her injured eye. He said he could remember a person's face and find out their location. Riley pounded the wall with his fist in outrage and shouted that it wasn't fair to use the radar. The saint wondered what a radar was. Riley replied that there was a saint who used the men's room as if it were his own. These statements were extremely embarrassing for young Frisia. Riley made a disapproving expression and declared that there didn't seem to be any more saints in this world. The prince's statements deeply offended the saint. He exclaimed that he hadn't told her that. He replied that he himself had indicated that she was not his type. Once again, the third prince didn't say anything to her. Finally, he got up from the bathroom and asked what they wanted from him. Frisia coughed and commented that she felt a little embarrassed talking about these things in the bathroom. But no one had ever seen such a petulant smile. It seemed to shine with a heavenly splendor. The girl reached out to the prince and said that he had been blessed by the divine goddess Idnissa. Fragments of his previous existence flashed through his consciousness when a saint whispered to him that he had been chosen by the holy sword. Riley was determined not to believe that again. The young man remained silent. Frisia continued, stating that this was why he, the Lord, Riley didn't let her finish her sacred speech. She begged him to get up. The third prince smiled sadly and asked if she had accidentally informed him that he had to eradicate some evil. A trickle of cold sweat ran down his cheek. The saint was perplexed and asked what he was talking about. But then she understood that he was right and questioned him. Shocked, how did he know? This was not what Riley honestly expected to hear. Again, the prince thought deeply. His bright, carefree world was falling apart. Again, the young man clenched his teeth. Then I wondered if they were trying to convert him into a gentleman again. Frisia tells us that, according to the revelation, the prince had received power from Riley. He was sure she was about to say the familiar words about needing to defeat another villain, but contrary to his expectations, Frisia said it was because of a dragon. He was surprised and asked, and the saint confirmed his words. She said that a dragon was about to appear, and that it would bring disaster not only to Solia, but to the entire world. He said it would be a real disaster. Riley asked what would happen now. Frisia added that, as the goddess Ionina herself declared, he was the one who would have to capture the terrible dragon. Riley remembered that she had declared herself to be the goddess Ionina. He had a feeling that she must be omnipotent. He looked at the saint in bewilderment, his nose wrinkled. The prince felt that there were so many planets in the cosmos, and she clung to this one, making him work hard to rescue some small settlements. Riley informed Frisia that he knew what his nickname was, the Lazy Sword. He repeated the term lazy once again. The third prince waved his hands and stated that he imagined he would live the rest of his life doing nothing. So why the hell did they want him to hunt a dragon? He also asked if he remembered what he called him last time. The prince did not wait for an answer. He claimed he was gay, angered by the reality of being that way. Riley was already irritating Frisia terribly. Nani questioned the reality that he was gay. Frisia shouted that she didn't need to know. When Riley came out, she asked if they wanted her to cooperate after saying that. Fresher was scandalized by her actions, shouting at her to wait because she wasn't finished yet. The girl was really upset with the boy. Frasier screamed loudly and Riley stopped now. She said more calmly that he was, in fact, the one who had detained Destroyer. He questioned whether this was true. Riley was silent for a moment, turning her back to the girls. And then, with an expression of terror, he turned and whispered something that scared the saint a little. He shrugged and said something about drugs and experiments in the wizard's tower. Who discovered everything? The prince's eyes widened as he asked who had told him. He asked again who had told this nonsense. Nanny looked at him silently. Finally, Riley's lethal gaze fixed on her, and he wondered if it had been her. Nanny remained mute, but sweat was running down his face. Riley went to her, explaining that she had asked him not to tell her anything. Freya rushed in front of Nanny, protecting her, and ordered him to wait. But Riley ordered her out of the way. He looked at the saint in a way that perhaps no one had ever looked at her. He ended up giving instructions. Riley held Nanny's shoulder tightly. He approached the girl and asked if she knew he had deceived her. Frasier lowered her head and asked Riley not to worry as Nanny had just told him. Riley asked irritably what Prince Daniel was talking about. The saint was surprised and insisted that she had not told anyone about her abilities. She only indicated that she had contributed a lot to the victory over Astroy. Nanny was upset and Frasier reminded her that Nanny had resisted until the end. Walking in the opposite direction, Riley repeated again that he didn't want to. Frasier shouted that he had power, that he had defeated Astroya. The word power did not please the prince at all. On the contrary, it even disgusted him. Riley said goodbye to her and asked for God's sake to leave him alone and let him rest. Frasier asked how, but there was no answer. Riley turned to Nanny and started to say something that worried her. Nanny tensed. Riley gave a happy smile and offered to go out and talk. Despite the friendly smile, his vibe didn't inspire any confidence. Finally, dawn arrived. The rays of the morning sun fell on the IPET property. Finn was reading a newspaper in his office when something caught his attention. He wondered what it was. He looked at the headline. What did you say happened the night before in Solia? He stated that the night before a set of boxes had been discovered in the Sorcerer's Tower of Solia. It was discovered that inside the boxes there was a significant amount of illicit and psychoactive marijuana. The revelation that the Seventh Circle wizard, Astroy, was the owner of this shipment shocked the inhabitants of Solia. A young gentleman from an aristocratic family helped reveal the terrible reality. Prince Daniel presented the medal to the third son of the Count of Ipoletta. Finn Ipoletta was really surprised by what he read. His hands involuntarily tightened the edges of the newspaper. The Count was thrilled and proud of his own son. He exclaimed that he needed to write a letter to Iris immediately. His scream was audible even outside the mansion. Everyone was already outside the beautiful structure of the competition. While Zara and Lady Ares seemed satisfied, Riley and Nanny felt discouraged. Iron cried, comforted by the maiden. The lady asked her son where he had been recently. Riley replied that he had been going to the bathroom for a while. And Anso Yozoi pondered whether yesterday it was only because of the young master that Santa Fresha had learned the whole truth about the great master Astroy. The girls they passed and pallet around screamed. One of them asked if the other thought it was a gentleman. The other asked if she hadn't heard him. She said it sounded like him. The gentleman of the famous family in Pellet. The first he said he was the youngest in the family and that he wasn't like they said. Riley rolled his eyes dismissively and understood that this was exactly why he wanted to stay in the shadows. She was irritated by the idea that a simple sword strike would be enough to leave everyone shocked and intrigued. Nanny looked the prince in the eyes. Lady Aras was delighted and informed her son that his father must be extremely happy. Riley responded that he was probably right. He stated that he didn't seem to have much of an option but to accept. His mother smiled pleasantly. Finally, she focused her attention on Niney and sweetly asked who the girl was. Niney hesitated for a moment. Riley said that it was a little difficult to describe and that, in general, everything was quite complicated. His mind was getting confused. The prince apologized for not informing her immediately. He said he had something to tell them. Zara and Ian looked at him, and Ian even stopped crying. Despite the new tears in her eyes, Riley stroked her neck and whispered that the reason was because he had come looking for her in the bathroom. Zara whispered to Madame to take a look. He added that the girl appeared to be blind in one eye. Lady Iris examined it closely and commented that it looked like Zara was right. The third prince smiled and added that he had seen her perform magic yesterday and that she had been wonderful. Nani was embarrassed. Looking to his left, Riley said that after having measured his mana in the tower, he also wished to practice magic. Lady Iris asked what he was going to do with her. The prince stated that he thought another maiden would not be bad for free time and that she also possessed magic. Ian shouted. He asked what the Lord said. "It's a girl." "No." Riley became more serious and said he knew she had been influenced by the tower's tests. He informed her that he understood the situation she was in and that she couldn't let it go. He stated that he remembered why he had received the award. Ian was not happy at all. Lady Aras took the old man's arm and informed him that she did not mind at all. Zara wasn't particularly thrilled with his decision either. It was a beautiful sunset, and Madden, in front of his son and his new lover, was delighted that Raleigh had finally decided to do something on his own. He stated that this is why he wanted to respect his choice. All these sentences closed Jan's ears, and he shook her hand, dissatisfied. However, he had no option, so he said that if the lady looked good, he was fine with it too. The elated woman pulled Nani forward, asked her if she had found out, and ordered her to salute her. He told her they were the people who took care of his family. The girl bowed lowly and introduced herself as Nani. Zara looked at her with a bit of contempt. She commented that it was evident from Nani that she was from Solia, as she had neither manners nor nobility. She approached and explained that her name was Nani. The maid pointed her index finger informatively and explained that she had already been to Lower Solia, so she knew what she was talking about. He said he would take care of her and told her to get ready. Nani could not fully understand what Zara meant. Riley, upon noticing this, smiled. He remembered how he had instructed Nani to go and talk to him. It was unclear what else he could do. As Nani had interfered, he told her to travel with him to Ipete County, as he felt it was better to have Nani close by to monitor her. He looked at Frisia, Nani, and said that he would also get rid of her and finally feel good. Meanwhile, I'd wondered what he was talking about, as Raleigh had explained to him that if he had kept quiet, he wouldn't have had to take her. He asked Frisia not to make a spectacle. The third prince asked what the saint would say about this. The two girls remained silent. Once again, without waiting for a response, he himself suggested that if she didn't want to say anything, it was best to end it there. Finally, Nani announced that he was going, as he still had issues to resolve with the prince. He remembered that Raleigh had called her and informed her that he hadn't heard from her yet. Nani defended his decision by noting that if he were around, he would certainly learn to start his life from scratch. He thought a little, but his path would become a little clearer. Zara clapped her hands with joy and said that now, finally, they could go to the county. She turned to the prince and said that a letter had recently arrived, in which it was said that the count wanted to see his son as soon as possible. Han thought it likely that Fenipola had read the newspaper and therefore it was time to return. The rays of the afternoon sun gently fell on the roofs of the Solia Kingdom's regional houses. Nani and Raleigh walked side by side. The girl asked the prince, "Should I call you sir now?" She didn't expect him to respond, but reported that she was happy nonetheless. Riley looked at her, surprised to hear this, but Nani looked extremely pleased at that moment, with a beautiful smile. The girl was happy, saying she never dreamed she could leave that horrible place. Looking at her, Riley also smiled, calling Nani funny. They traveled along the stone road towards Solia, shining brightly in the sky. Riley commented that anyone who saw them naively would think he was saving her. Along the way, when they noticed something, everyone stopped. Zara looked ahead, and Ian and Raleigh looked serious. Lady Iris was pleased and shouted that it was Bishop Rebosa. The young man bowed courteously and said to the woman. Iris, who was happy to see her again, asked intriguedly what was the reason for her presence there. Rebosa replied that he was looking for someone. He turned to find Raleigh and Nani at his side, and they stiffened. Bishop Rebosa happily declared that it was a recent incident. Behind him came two other priests with two white boxes. He looked directly at Raleigh and Nani and said that it looked like the two young men had forgotten their belongings in the temple. They didn't understand a word Rebosa was saying. A box was delivered to Raleigh. The other was given to Nani. Rebosa smiled mischievously and stated that those were his prizes. Riley asked in disbelief what other prizes there were. In the package, she found a purple dress. Rebosa stated that it was a public place, so she couldn't say directly. But she began to speak, and Riley stopped her from continuing. On the third prince's hand was a golden bracelet and a hazy, translucent ring. Bishop Rebosa approached and whispered that those items were his. He stated that unfortunately the staff was broken, and so he was simply handing them over. Naini asked the scoundrels if they had to accept it. Rebosa asked what was the problem. The girl said that for her he was an insignificant person, whom she hated with all her being, and therefore it was obvious that she did not want to accept it. However, against Naini's words, Rebosa ordered them to accept the items. He asked who, if not them, would give the temple the artifacts. Raleigh and Naini looked at those present with surprising scorn and contempt. Rebosa smiled widely, closed his eyes and swore that those things were pure and harmless. Behind him, Santa Frisia remained silent with her head lowered. She looked up from the hood. A doubt arose in Raleigh's mind, and she wondered if the bishop himself had invented it. Naini asked her master present if she would accept. They held 2 huge boxes in their hands, covered with the same white coverings. Riley looked at her and asked how she was doing. The girl replied that she had already tried it and that there was no more magic in them. Riley tilted her head and whispered, "That's the way it is." Now the prince smiled at the bishop, thanked him and said that, as they gave him, they should accept it. Lady Iris arrived from behind and said it was time for them to leave, as the earl had asked them to hurry. The bishop replied, "Ah, that's true." He informed her that she should be proud of her son as he had received a medal. She responded that he was right and thanked him for taking care of things personally. Finally, Rebosa said he hoped they had enjoyed their visit to Solia. Lady Iris commented that they would definitely return at some point. After saying this, the locals and the servants of the Ipiet tribe turned and left. Frisia was upset. Later, in the temple, Bishop Rebosa replied that it was definitely different. At first, Santa Frisia could not understand who the young man was talking about. But the young man revealed to her that he was referring to the young teacher. He went on to state that, however, Frisia had already told him that a revelation had been made to him. He remembered his words that this noble was destined to destroy evil. Frisia didn't respond, and Rebosa, upon leaving, added that, in this case, it was about living and seeing. The door behind the bishop finally closed. The saint was furious with Rebosa. His eyes were blazing with anger. She spoke to herself, indicating that she didn't know what she was doing. But there were 3 revelations. Frisia sat in a beautiful armchair. The girl knew that she had received 3 revelations from the goddess Irene Nessa. In one of them, the magnificent goddess went to her daughter, Saint Freya, saying that it would soon be time for her first test. The goddess was wearing a golden mask covered with beautiful white flowers. All around her were golden leaves. She begged Freya to be careful who was taking her to him. The goddess stretched out her hand and declared that the hero was destined to stop him. She said that Freya had to be careful with the dragon that would soon appear on Earth. Frisia concluded that his initial test certainly had something to do with Rebosa, but she felt that perhaps the young lord, Riley, could disrupt the bishop's evil plans. Who knows? His eyes shone again. It was revealed that this is why she didn't notify him about the presence of the first revelation. Frisia suspected that what Rebosa was up to. She did not have time to finish her thought, as the priest called her, ordering the saint to hurry. He stated that everyone was waiting for her. Frisia couldn't stop thinking about that man. She told the priest she was on her way. She realized that this man was not as simple as the bishop assumed. It was already evening when Raleigh, his mother, and his servants finally arrived at the estate. They were received by the serious Count of Ipiet. He crossed his arms over his chest and stated that they had returned. He had requested the family to return quickly, so he was a little disappointed with their late arrival. Riley contacted his father and was surprised that he was still awake. Lady Arras let out a light laugh behind her son's back. Finny Paletta tensely put his hand to his mouth and asked his son where the medal was. Sweat ran down the Count's forehead. The third prince, embarrassed, handed a shiny gold medal to his father. The medal looked extremely majestic in Finn's eyes. It seemed to him that his son's hand also shone with the prize. The Earl of Ipied was fascinated by the shine of the medal, surprised that Prince Daniel himself had given it to Raid. Lady Iris, on the other hand, let out a laugh as usual and reminded the Earl that he was afraid his son might get hurt. The lady asked Finn not to always be so honest with others. The Count cleared his throat and asked if the fact that only Ian and Zara were among them bothered him. Iris promptly stated that there was no problem with them. They were doing a fantastic job, and Anne and Seta then bowed and saluted their master, Finny Pidgeot. Niney looked at them in shock, but didn't respond immediately, soon imitating their actions. She wore a snow-white robe with a scar on her face. He pondered what kind of young man would be with them. Raleigh's thoughts seemed to have been struck by lightning at his father's statements. Lady Aries crossed her arms softly and added that it seemed like they had a lot to talk about. The woman gestured for them to enter. Raleigh sighed in relief and accepted. Naney looked at him questioningly as they walked through the grassy farmland. Riley thanked God they'd finally arrived, saying he almost sat on his heels in the car. Naney smiled sweetly, understandingly. In response, someone stopped in front of them and asked, "Finally back?" It was Joyd. He looked surprisingly cheerful. The other prince smiled and said that he had heard that his brother had won a medal in Solia. He extended his hand and asked for permission to look at her. When Raleigh did not comply, Joyd gently urged him to give him the medal again. Riley looked at him with an extremely tired expression, as if he had been working hard all night and all day. The third prince reflected on the fact that he had just arrived and believed that he could now sleep peacefully. For a moment, Raleigh remained silent.